Good afternoon, everybody. I call to order the October 2025 meeting of the Finance and Operations Committee of the University of Minnesota Board of Regents. I thank you to those of you who are joining us by live stream today, those of you who are in the room and the campus of the Twin Cities, and those of you who are joining us via Zoom. I'm also grateful for the student representatives with us today. So we have Ethan Ellis with us, and we have Caleb Massey, both from the Twin Cities campus. We welcome you, and we look forward to getting to know you better and are grateful for your assistance here with us over the course of the year. I wonder if each of you would share where you are in school and what your major is. Ethan, I'll start with you.
Hello, my name is Ethan Ellis, and I'm the graduate student representative to the Board of Regents. I'm a fourth-year PhD candidate at the Humphrey School of Public Affairs on the Twin Cities campus, studying topics pertaining to labor, education, and criminal justice policy. I look forward to advocating for the needs of graduate students in this precarious time.
Okay, I already am awed and impressed by you, so that's good. And Caleb.
Thank you, Ward. Thank you, Chair. My name is Caleb Massey. I'm an undergraduate junior here at the University of Minnesota Twin Cities at Minnesota Carlson, studying finance and risk management insurance. Thank you for having me. Well,
that's great to meet you too, Caleb. I think you two could probably run this very well. so thank you. Yeah. So the first item of business this afternoon is discussion of our 2025-26 committee work plan. It was developed in advance to advance this year's board priorities, and it creates time for topics that will help us implement the university's new strategic plan once it is approved. Those items are ready to come before us and includes input from President Cunningham and Executive Vice President Goldman on topics they are advancing. In addition to required reports and approvals, the work plan also has topics that highlight important work this committee does to support the implementation of our mission. I will say that last year, the Special Committee on University Workforce took a deep dive into employment, recruitment and retention, and workforce development. That special committee's work will help build our understanding in those areas of our critical mission, and will continue and weave through topics into this committee's work for the year. With that, I'll ask Executive Vice President Goldman if he has any additional comments about the work plan.
Great. Thank you, Chair Wheeler, members of the committee. I'm pleased to present the 25-26 work plan for the Finance and Operations Committee. As you can see, the agenda for the coming year contains in-depth updates of the university's operations, fiscal stability, and long-term economic health. I want to highlight a few key areas that will start flowing into the committee, knowing more is to come as we align with the strategic plan once it is fully implemented. We'll begin laying the groundwork for the next annual operating budget. In December, we'll have a policy discussion for FY27 budget variables and levers. We'll build upon this conversation in February with a review of the FY27 annual operating budget framework. In April, you'll receive an annual progress report on sustainability and energy efficiency targets and standards. This item will seek input on how to extend and expand environmental sustainability efforts given our resource constraints. Also in April, we'll engage with key strategic initiatives underway within our Office of Human Resources through the annual Workforce and Human Resource Strategy Report, which includes the annual Total Compensation Report. Another important spring discussion will cover how artificial intelligence can enhance efficiency, effectiveness, and the overall experience on each of our campuses with the functional areas and services that support our operations. Finally, much of our discussion throughout the year will be set for stage for review of both the President's recommended FY27 annual capital improvement budget and the FY27 annual operating budget, both of which will come before this committee in June. These work plans ensure we maintain rigorous oversight of our finances and assets while proactively incorporating strategic initiatives that will define the future of the university. Thank you, Chair Wheeler.
Thank you. Thank you. Are there any comments on the work plan? Okay, seeing none, we'll move to our next item. We're going to review and act on the 2 collective bargaining agreements. We'll take each agreement individually. First, Vice President Horstman, welcome. Will walk us through the proposed agreement with Teamsters Local 320.
Chair Wheeler, members of the board, thank you for the opportunity today to come before you with these ratified agreements. First, I would like to take a quick moment to thank the bargaining teams, both representing our employees on the union side, the local union leadership, and our employee leaders that were part of the bargaining teams on their behalf, and on the university side. All the partners that supported the Office of Human Resources in this negotiation mediation effort represented the best. They were diligent, persistent, never missed a session on either side, put in some long hours at the end, and the result is before you today. So thank you to all those individuals. This first agreement is with Minnesota Teamsters Public and Law Enforcement Employees, Union Local 320. It is a 3-year agreement effective from July 1st of this year, 2025, through June 30th, 2028. It covers employees, approximately 1,395 employees are in this represented group. And the key contractual highlights I will summarize briefly. Wage increases in year 1 will be 3.5% for all pay steps and will take effect on this past July 14th, consistent with what we did with our non-union employees in their salary pool. Year 2 will be 3.5% for all pay steps, and year 3 will be 3%, again, for all pay steps. We do have market adjustments for select job codes that were deemed necessary, and this will range from 0.5% to 2% depending on the adjustment that was determined. In year 2, we'll have a 2% market adjustment for select job codes, and then we also have shift differentials that had not been moved in a number of years, and so there will be incremental increases to shift differentials for employees working shifts starting before 6 a.m. or ending after 7 p.m., and that will increase from 55 cents an hour to 90 cents per hour in year 1 and up to $1.05 per hour in year 2. Employees that work shifts that begin sometime between 9 p.m. and 1 a.m. will receive an increase to $1.10 from their current level of 70 cents, and then it will go to $1.30 in year 2. The effective dates of these differentials do line up with the wage increases in year 1 and year 2. A really important aspect of this was the agreement, a new article on a respectful workplace, which includes a problem-solving and standing labor management committee agenda item between the university and the union. We also increased the number of weeks that we would hold assignments during an employee leave. There is a memo of understanding on this that increases this from a leave of 6 weeks to a leave of 10 weeks, where we will protect their specific position. We renewed the summer work agreement, MOU, which had existed before and both sides agreed to keep in place. And finally, there is a new MOU regarding workplace safety and air quality. This is the end of my high-level summary on the current contract in front of you for Teamsters. So with that, I ask for the board's approval of this agreement. Of course, I'm open to any questions you may have.
Great. Thank you so much, Vice President Horstman. I wonder if we could get, before we have discussion on the item, could we have a motion to approve?
So moved.
And a second?
Second.
Terrific. Any discussion? Regent Gully.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, VP Horstman. I just wanted to say thank you to everyone for the work that you did to get to an agreement. I know it was hard and it was a long negotiation process. Thank you to everyone on your team who did that work, and thank you to the Teamsters who also had a long bargaining run. I'm really grateful that we got to an agreement that everybody feels good about. Thanks.
Great. Thanks, Regent Gully. Any other discussion? If not, all those in favor, say aye.
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 Any opposed? Great, motion passes. Thank you. We'll move on to the next then. Vice President Horstman.
Thank you, Chair Wheeler. The next agreement is actually 3 collective bargaining agreements. At one time, we had 3 different distinct locals for AFSCME, which is the American Federation of State, County, and Municipal Employees. They currently have merged over the last year into Local 3800, but are still 3 separate agreements. However, a lot of the terms and conditions are applicable across all the contracts. This too is a 3-year agreement effective July 1st of this year through June 30th of 2028. For the 3 groups that are represented by this local, the first are healthcare employees. There's 192 healthcare employees within AFSCME, clerical employees, 1,097, and technical employees, 655. The total is 1,944 employees represented by AFSCME currently. Wage increases across these contracts in year 1 will be 3.5% for all steps, 3.5% for all steps in year 2, and 3% increase for all pay steps in year 3. And I should say that, should the salary pool for the university represent a higher salary pool than that, that would be what this contract would receive. So we move into market adjustments in year 1. It's 1 to 1.5% for select job codes. And then there's a market adjustment again in year 3 of 1% for selected job codes. AFSCME also had shift differential changes, and they're currently at 60 cents an hour and are going to 90 cents an hour in the first year, 95 cents in the second year, and then $1 per hour in the third year. Specific to the AFSCME healthcare contract, there is a new section added that allows departments to create outstanding service award programs, and also to allow the flexibility to extend trainee periods from 9 to 18 months, allowing more time to complete their apprenticeship and their coursework. There's new problem-solving language for AFSCME Healthcare that mirrors what has been in the clerical and technical contracts around settlement of disputes. There are changes across all 3 contracts. There's language regarding infectious disease prevention that has been added, and there's 2 new MOUs regarding air quality and automated external defibrillators, or AEDs. Finally, a revised memo of understanding now applies to all 3 contracts and includes up to 40% university paid time or 16 hours a week for the local 3,800 president for union work. That is a university employee that fills that role for the local 3,800. And then up to 20% university paid time or 8 hours a week for the 3 business unit chairs that each represent one of these locals. So that is my conclusion of the high-level points of the AFSCME agreements. And with that, I ask for your review and approval of these contracts.
Terrific. Thank you, Vice President Horstman. Is there a motion from the board to approve the resolution related to the proposed labor agreement with AFSCME 3800?
So move.
Great, thank you. Great, thank you. Any discussion? Seeing, Regent Gully.
Again, I'll just say thank you.
Okay,
Great.
thank you.
There being no further discussion, all those in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed, say no. Okay, that motion is approved. Thank you to you and all of the people around the collective tables that got us to this resolution. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Chair Wheeler and members of the board.
Yeah. All right, we'll go on to the third item, which is the President's recommended 6-year capital plan and 2026 state capital budget request. I'm going to invite President Cunningham and Executive Vice President Goldman and Vice President of University Services Alice Roberts Davis to outline any changes made since this item was reviewed in the September special meeting. President Cunningham, would you like to begin?
Chair Wheeler and the board, thank you. I am very excited for this to come back to the board here today. I imagine all of us here have heard the phrase, "You're a product of your environment." And I imagine we take that to mean that some aspects of one's environment are beyond their control. And that doesn't have to necessarily include the state of our facilities for our workforce and our students and our staff. So this 6-year capital plan we're proposing will allow us in many ways to think a lot more innovatively and creatively than we've been, because we've been forced to do that in recent years, that will hopefully help us control our own destiny a bit more and set up our students and faculty and staff for future success. So with a lot of gratitude for the creativity and thinking that the teams, we've tasked the teams to do, I'll turn the meeting over to Greg Goldman, our Executive Vice President for Finance and Operations, and Alice Roberts-Davis, our Vice President of University Services.
Thank you, President Cunningham. Thank you, Chair Wheeler and members of the committee. Last month, we outlined the critical need for a predictable and sustainable approach to managing our physical assets, noting the uncertainty of relying on irregular or unpredictable state funding. We also shared the scale of our nearly $6 billion maintenance challenge. In that presentation, we described a plan designed to address the Capital Investment Initiative. This plan secures up to $750 million in dedicated funding over the next decade by using a reoccurring commitments from our operating budget to borrow for our critical facility renewal. We're excited about being able to define our future and being able to move the needle forward in a substantial way. With that, I'd like to turn it over to Vice President Alice Roberts-Davis, who will now give you a brief recap of the President's recommended 6-year capital plan and state capital request. Alice, thank you.
Thank you. Good afternoon, Chair Wheeler and members of the board. It's great to be here with you today. The purpose of this item is to act on the President's recommended 2025 6-year capital plan and 2026 state capital request. The 6-year capital plan comes before the board each year to outline a comprehensive approach to addressing our most pressing capital needs across the system for 2026 to 2031 this year. The 6-year plan is required by board policy and is a document that sets the direction for major capital projects. This multi-year planning process ensures that we are focusing our limited resources and our limited capacity on our highest priority projects. You will find the plan in the supporting documents in your docket materials. Additionally, we have the 2026 state capital request, which outlines the submission the university will make to the state for consideration during the 2026 legislative session. This slide was included in my presentation last month and provides a big picture summary of the 6-year capital plan. The first section shown on the left of the slide lists the state capital requests for the next 3 years. HEAPR remains a top priority for every year since the urgency and need to reinvest in our facilities and infrastructure is so great. In 2026, we will also request support for the St. Paul Campus Center, as well as the dentistry clinical renovation. I'll talk more about those in just a moment. In 2027, we will request state support for the Large Lakes Observatory at UMD and space consolidation and decommissioning at the Twin Cities campus. The Large Lakes Observatory in Duluth is truly a one-of-a-kind facility dedicated to studying how large lakes function, how they behaved in the past, and how they will respond to environmental changes in the future. For space consolidation and decommissioning, that project will recognize the opportunity to be better stewards of our facilities and consolidate into less square footage, which allows us to be more sustainable both financially and environmentally. The capital investment initiatives, which we described last month, will help us develop the plans to kickstart work on these important consolidation initiatives. The next section of the slide shows the projects that are in development. These projects are in some phase of design and expected to be funded during the next 6 years. You'll note that the Capital Investment Initiative funds will contribute full or partial funding for many of these projects. We can't emphasize enough how important and transformative these funds will be for preparing and advancing multi-year planning with more predictability and speed. The final section lists projects that are under consideration, and these are identified as capital priorities recommended to be complete for further assessment to support our decision-making. You'll note that most of these are impactful existing buildings, but we are also working on feasibility for a facility for academic health in Duluth. For a closer look at the 2026 state capital request with just a few more details, we have HEAPR, which has been a long-standing primary source of funding for renewal and an anchor of our state request since it was first enacted in the 1990s. It's a great deal when we can get it, but because there is no university match required. However, as I've mentioned many times, we cannot rely on the state. The Capital Investment Initiative funds will play a critical role in bridging some of those gaps in timing and enable us to be more planful and ultimately complete more projects. The next project will build a centrally located St. Paul Campus Center facility to replace the existing St. Paul Campus Center and McGrath Library buildings in St. Paul. The new campus center will be a highly visible and welcoming campus destination that supports the daily needs of students, faculty, and staff, and reflects the vitality, mission, and experience of St. Paul to all of our visitors to campus. The facility will combine student unions activities in new meetings and event spaces, study areas, retail and recreation spaces, with student health services in a new St. Paul campus library in about 98,000 square feet. And finally, the dentistry clinical renovation will renovate portions of Moose Tower to advance education and training for the only dental school in Minnesota where we train over 70% of the dentists in the state. The renovated space will also improve upon the patient experience for the more than 90,000 patients who visit Moose Tower each year. Fall is here, and we've begun scheduling our campus tours in support of our state request. State leaders and legislators will be on all of our campuses to see our projects, so it's almost go time for the legislative session. We're prepared for that, and we're excited, and I will stand for any questions that you may have.
Great. Thank you, Vice President Roberts-Davis. Before I invite questions or comments, is there a motion to approve the 6-year capital plan and the 2026 state capital request?
I'll move.
Is there a second? Second. Okay, good. Let's turn to discussion. Tad Johnson.
Thank you, Chair Wheeler, and thanks everyone for the presentation. Last month, the Regents got a chance to tour the St. Paul campus and got to tour the campus center facility and the McGrath Library. And I can definitely see the need for tearing those down and starting over again. I mean, it's really important for attracting students and faculty and staff. My brother was a student there in the 1970s, and it was, I mean, it's like that campus is one of our crown jewels, and we've always been a leader in agriculture and veterinary sciences and horticulture and et cetera. And I think it's really important that that get funded, and hopefully some legislators will take a tour of that during the session and get a look at both of those buildings, because I think they'll concur that those are definitely in need of replacement. And thank you for your presentation and for giving us a tour over there.
And I would imagine, Vice President Roberts-Davis, that those tour of those St. Paul facilities are planned for the legislators.
Absolutely,
Yeah.
Chair Wheeler and Regents. We have our first tour on October 21st with state leaders, and we plan to start right there.
Perfect. Thank you. Regent Verhalen.
Thank you, Chair Wheeler. I know last month Regent Tad Johnson mentioned this, but I think it's worth noting just because it's such a large dollar amount for the Large Lakes Observatory at UMD. For a lot of people, they have no idea what this facility is, or that we have researchers who are doing their work in a building that's over 100 years old and can't maintain temperatures and humidity necessary to complete their limnology research and other important work that they're doing on the Great Lakes. So this investment is incredibly important, especially as you think about the research vessel Blue Heron and the fact that they have to travel tens of miles just to get to the facility, carrying very delicate equipment in order to be able to even get out onto the lake. So the researchers at the Large Lakes Observatory have been doing an incredible job of doing their continued research on the Great Lakes, but this investment is really important to bring that work back to the shorelines of Duluth and be able to provide a facility that matches the wonderful research they're doing and for everyone's benefit. The research vessel Blue Heron, she has her own Wikipedia page if you want to go check that out. But thank you for including that in the capital plan. It's very important investment.
Agree. Thank you, Regent Verhalen. Any other comments or questions? Okay, there being no, oh, go ahead, please,
wanted to
Regent
remark
Hines.
that the President and Vice President Goldman have done a remarkable job, I think, in looking out into the future as to our physical facilities. And the plan for that, I had a conference with Vice President Goldman about it. It's just tremendously impressive, and the fact that we're planning so carefully for what's to come, I think, is really remarkable, and I think is worthy of congratulations. So I'm delighted to be able to support it.
Great, well stated, Regent Hines and President Cunningham.
And thank you for those kind words, Regent Hines and Chair Wheeler. And, I'll just sort of turn that back and thank the board who approved the budget that has the amount of dollars in it that we can then use to leverage against have a capital investment fund. And it was a hard budget year, but by putting that $10 million in allows us to create this fund, which allows us for this team to be able to plan multiple years out where before they couldn't. And those are hard budget choices, but here we do have, the results of hard budget choices are things that really matter for the campuses and for our students. And so I'm very appreciative. It was a difficult decision, but really the right one. And with it, we're going to do great things. Yeah.
Terrific. Any other comments or questions? Seeing none, all those in favor, please say aye.
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 Opposed? The motion is approved.
Thank you.
All right. Okay, now we're going to turn next to the overview of the university's budget process and modeling. Today, Vice President and Budget Director Julie Tonneson and Assistant Budget Director Corin Ziewitz will provide us with an overview of the university budget process and model. Vice President Tonneson, would you like to begin?
Thank you, Chair Wheeler. I think I'm going to do a quick intro here. And that is, the presentation provides an essential groundwork for understanding how the President's recommended operating budget is developed over the many, many months leading for this board's review. Today, we'll focus on the budget process and the budget model. This is a framework that guides discussions and resource allocations across our 50 major budgeting units. I must emphasize today's discussion is purely contextual and educational. We will be using examples to illustrate concepts, but dollars projections, specific challenges, or recommendations for the FY27 budget are intentionally excluded from this discussion. Our goal today is to ensure you have a clear understanding of the tools and timelines they will use in the budget development before we dive into the specific numbers and policies later in the year. I'll now turn it over to Vice President and Budget Director Julie Tonneson and Assistant Budget Director Corinne Ziewitz. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Chair Wheeler and members of the committee for having us here today to talk through the university's budget model and process. We recognize that there are several of you who have heard at least some of this information previously, while for others, this will be entirely new information. Either way, we feel that it's helpful to hear this information more than once, as each time you hear it, you are likely to pick up new details as you think through the university's budget. I'll start the conversation today with an overview of the process, and then Vice President Tonneson will discuss the university's budget model. As Executive Vice President Goldman said, we will not talk through the numbers or the overall budget today. Instead, today's discussion will focus more on the process and the people involved. Then in December, we'll dive more into the numbers with a presentation on the high-level budget variables and levers. This slide provides a quick overview of how we will move through our discussions between now and June when we present the President's recommended operating budget. I'm going to start at the highest level of what our internal budget process involves. First, we'll discuss the funding sources, because the sources determine how we can use the funds given their flexibility. We will also talk through the people involved in the budget process, as engagement and consultation are central to our model and process. Then I will touch on what we mean by units. This is a term you will hear frequently when we are talking about the university's budget. We'll start with the university's funding sources. You may have heard us say in the past that we use fund accounting at the university. We are required to use fund accounting as we need to track the funds based on where they come from and the associated restrictions with each source. For budgeting purposes, it is helpful to think about our funding sources in two groups. We have the budget framework funds, which are primarily state funds and tuition. These funds are planned at the institutional level. The board approves our requests to the state for funding and also approves the tuition rates each year. Then we have the non-framework funds, which are resources that are generated by departments and planned and managed primarily at the unit level. These revenues include fees, sales, clinical income, and so forth. We spend most of our time in the budget process talking through the less restricted tuition and state funds, as this is where our decision-making is primarily focused. These are the funds that make up what we call the budget framework. With that said, we still work with the units to project, review, and manage the non-framework funds. There are just fewer decisions required of the president and the Board of Regents in that space. Each year, the president's proposed budget includes all sources. We'll present an all funds budget to you in June. Next, we will move on to the people who are engaged in the budget process. Our budget process starts in late summer with the president, who makes preliminary planning decisions around key variables such as tuition increases and reallocations on the revenue side, and compensation increases, investments, and such on the expense side. Those decisions are made through consultation with other institutional leaders and are critical to jump-starting the budget development process. The president has then delegated implementation of that process to the Executive Budget Committee, which includes the Executive Vice President and Provost, the Executive Vice President for Finance and Operations, the Executive Vice President for Clinical Affairs, the Vice President and Budget Director, and myself, the Assistant Budget Director. The Executive Budget Committee's work each year includes developing and distributing budget instructions to the units based on the President's planning parameters. Unit leaders then decide how to respond to those instructions. Some units have a full engagement process with their departments, while others focus their efforts at the collegiate or unit level. Much of this depends on the size, scope, and culture of the unit. We then meet with each unit on their budget to learn about their priorities and their challenges, as well as to gather technical information for the budget. The Executive Budget Committee discusses each unit's budget individually. The university's budget is built at the unit level and up. We also meet with the chief financial managers monthly to provide updates and to get their feedback, and we meet with the chancellors, Twin Cities deans, vice presidents, and other unit leaders several times a year. This consultation process is critical given our distributed model, as well as our culture of transparency throughout the process. Finally, each year, the budget comes to you, the board, for review and approval. Moving on to units. When we talk about units, you will oftentimes hear us refer to them in two distinct groups, the academic units and the support units. The academic units are listed here. They are the doers of the university's missions and include the Crookston, Duluth, Morris, and Rochester campuses, as well as each college on the Twin Cities campus and several non-collegiate whole units with an academic mission, such as Minnesota Extension. The support units are units that support the mission, like Human Resources, the Office of Information Technology, Office of General Counsel, and so on, as well as our auxiliary functions such as housing, dining, parking, and athletics. As the asterisk points out, our auxiliary units and some of the academic-focused departments housed within support units are treated just like our academic units on the prior slide for purposes of the budget process. Collectively, these 50 units are referred to as our Resource Responsibility Centers, or also known as the RRCs. As I noted previously, we build the university's budget from the unit level up. Each unit is unique given its size and its resources. And here you can see how diverse the major academic units are, with budgets ranging from the experiment station's $15.6 million per year in revenue to the medical school with revenues over $980 million. The common theme among all the units is that they receive some state funding, but their other revenue sources vary. Units like the College of Liberal Arts and Carlson School of Management on the Twin Cities campus, as well as our greater Minnesota campuses, are dependent on tuition revenues, whereas units like the School of Public Health and the medical school rely more on grants and contracts. Each portfolio is varied, which means that each unit has a unique budget balancing plan. Our budget planning includes two distinct but interrelated operating budget processes. The first is the biennial budget process, in which we request operating funds from the state every 2 years. Our next biennial budget submission will occur in fall 2026, ahead of the 2027 legislative session. The second operating budget process is our own internal process, which occurs every year. The full 2-year cycle begins in the summer of the even number year. So for the current cycle, the summer of 2024, with a budget framework in which we balance our major budget variables from both a revenue and a cost perspective. That is the black box you see here. This includes making assumptions related to state funding for the upcoming biennium, which informs our biennial budget request to the state of Minnesota. We draft and review our proposal in the fall, present our request to the legislature during session, and then the legislature passes its budget in late spring or early summer. During this same time frame, we are working to craft our own operating budget, referenced here in the gold boxes. We meet with the support units each fall, the academic units in the spring, and bring a proposed budget to you in June. Throughout that process, we continually amend our assumptions on our key budget variables through the meetings with the units, as well as other factors, economic factors, discussions with the governor and legislature, internal consultations, and so on. In the second year, we continue to adjust the budget framework because we have more information on the state funding as our biennial budget has been passed. As you can see here, our internal process is generally the same for the second year. When this presentation was submitted prior to this meeting, it was still September, so the green box represents where we are currently sitting within the 2-year cycle, just beginning the FY27 annual budget process. As we go through the process, we'll arrive at a revised budget balancing framework that will be before you for review and action in June. Here's an example of a budget framework from almost 2 years ago. As you can see, it really involves very simple math in which revenues need to exceed or equal expenditures. We manage the budget on an incremental basis. The numbers shown here were planned growth in revenues and expenditures as we moved from fiscal year 2024 to fiscal year 25. This example is from mid-process. Each year when we bring the budget to you, it includes the final recommended budget framework for next year's budget. I will now turn it over to Julie Tonneson, Vice President and Budget Director, to discuss the university's budget model.
Good afternoon. My role here today is to walk us through a bit more of the process to help you understand how we finalize the budget framework through the use of a particular budget model. So what do we mean when we say budget model? Every budget requires a high-level plan outlining goals and objectives so we can align actions and resources to achieve them. We also need to understand the various policies, procedures, and priorities that flow from those goals and objectives to ensure that our recommendations respond appropriately. But there's one more piece that's very helpful in getting us to that final budget, and that is what we call the budget model. The model is a decision-making tool. It is a set of rules for how revenues and expenditures flow throughout the institution, some by formula and some by decision. It doesn't by itself determine the final outcomes. Instead, it sets up a structure for data and discussions that are designed to result in responsible and optimal financial management, regardless of which type of model you choose to use. The budget model we employ here is what's called a Responsibility Center Management, or RCM model. At the University of Minnesota, we moved to this type of model back in FY '98 for the reasons that you see here on this slide. In an RCM model, the budget process is very transparent and decentralized. As shown in an earlier slide, we have segmented the university into 50 different budgeting units, our RRCs, and have made the leaders of those units, the chancellors, the deans, the vice presidents, accountable for developing and then managing their budgets. To do that well, they have to understand the flow of the revenues and expenditures and how the decisions are made that impact those flows. As I will explain in upcoming slides, this model incorporates incentives to maximize revenue and control costs, which, along with the very real fact that good leaders make better decisions when they have full information, are the core of why we moved to this type of model. Prior to FY '98, we operated in what is known as a traditional higher education budget model, which is depicted by this chart on the left. In a traditional model, the significant discretionary revenues, the state appropriations, the ICR, and the tuition, are commingled at the university level, and the president and her leadership team create a budget in an incremental way, allocating those resources to every academic and support unit in a base plus minus kind of process. You can arrive at a great budget under this type of model. But here we chose to move to an RCM model for some of the benefits that it adds to the process of getting to that great budget. Our model is shown here in this graphic. We didn't get here all at once. We implemented in phases from FY '98 to FY '07, rather slow process. In our model, the earned or generated revenues in the top box on the left are attributed 100% to the RRCs generating them, which are almost exclusively the academic and auxiliary RRCs. The tuition is split 75% to the unit of instruction and 25% to the unit of enrollment. Sometimes that's the same unit. In addition, the state appropriation is allocated 100% to the academic units, not by formula, but by incremental base plus and minus decisions. Essentially, 100% of the revenues go to the academic RRCs. So that means they have to have 100% of the costs. In addition to their direct costs for faculty, equipment, travel, etc., we allocate on a proportional basis and through the use of formulas all of the support costs of the institution. Those support unit budgets are represented by the 9 major cost pools in the box on the right. The academic RRCs all get a bill for these pieces. There are many details, as you can imagine, that are embedded in here, but the final message I want to leave you with is starred on this slide, and that is that this set of attribution and allocation rules is just a tool in the process. It does not make the final decisions, which I can hopefully help you understand as we talk through this slide, which I call the 3-legged stool of resource and cost allocations. And I'm going to start at the bottom because it all goes back to the overarching goals and objectives and the fact that the president and her team decide what the priorities are and how best to achieve our goals. She makes decisions on the front end of the process, which informs the second leg of the stool as you move to the left. We turn those decisions into the budget framework for the year that we shared an example of earlier. We do that for the upcoming year or for the biennium, and we can run them out several years if and when that is helpful to do. The budget model then, the third leg of the stool, moving to the right, helps us translate that high-level 30,000-foot university budget plan down to the unique unit level to better understand its impacts and to expose the questions that we need to answer and the decisions we need to make to actually implement it successfully. So let me give you, I think the best way to do this is give you a quick example with several variables. Let's say the president decides to recommend a 3% salary increase pool, a 3% increase in tuition, and investments in the library perhaps, and maybe STEM faculty system-wide. Those are high-level decisions guided by the strategic plan and objectives, and the total revenue and expense impact of those decisions, along with reallocation plans and changes in state funding, et cetera, ends up in a balanced framework at the all-university level. Now, because of the budget model, we know what a 3% salary increase will cost for, let's say, the School of Nursing. We know what additional revenue a 3% increase in the tuition rate will generate for that school, along with their changes in enrollment. We know how much their cost pool charge will increase as a result of planned investments in the library. We know if there happens to be other revenues generated by that school that are growing enough to help their budget, and let's say they asked for 2 faculty in alignment with the STEM goals. Based on all those variables unique to that school, we then set up a budget framework just for them. But it can't end there. We have to make decisions to finalize things because perhaps those variables lead to a budget that isn't balanced, which brings us back to the bottom leg of the stool. If their resource changes aren't enough to pay for their cost increases, to balance, we may have to decide to cut them deeper. We may have to say no to those particular faculty positions they requested. We may have to reallocate resources from somewhere else in the institution to cover an imbalance there. And of course, the opposite of all of this could also be true. In some cases, their incremental revenues more than cover the cost increases, in which case we have to decide whether to leave the extra dollars with them for investment, ask them to reallocate less because they don't need all the cuts, or move O&M resources out of that unit to address needs elsewhere, and so on. The point here is that the budget model sets up the framework and the unique questions and discussion about priorities at the unit level. And then leadership has to decide how best to move forward to make each unit as successful as we possibly can. I've got 2 very quick examples here of this process from the FY24 budget, so a couple years ago. First, on the support side, where there are fewer variables to consider. For the Office of the General Counsel, you can see the decisions that were made to balance their budget. They asked for, and we said yes, to fund a tracking portal for public record requests, and they faced a compensation cost increase of $233,000 due to the institutional salary plan for that year. We addressed those costs by doing 2 things: requiring them to implement an internal reallocation, reducing their expenditures by $56,000, and by increasing their O&M allocation $192,000, which is the amount that went into the cost pool charges then for the academic units that year. For an academic unit example from the same year, we have CFANs. And you can see there are more variables here. Tuition revenue is growing by almost $1 million. The state increased our O&M appropriation that year, which allowed us to make a decision to invest $2.3 million of that increase to help balance this school's framework. Near the bottom of the chart, we asked them to reallocate or cut expenses by $778,000, and those things then paid for the compensation increase, the overhead or cost pool increases, and about $450,000 in new discretionary investment in the college. Each RRC has a framework for the year based on their unique characteristics, and it is the sum of those that become the university's balanced budget. Those are outcomes of our process and our model, but no 2 RCM budget models look the same. No processes look the same. Our particular model is supported and influenced by several things. We have a relatively large, unrestricted state appropriation that we can direct to needs in an incremental way. We are constitutionally autonomous from the state of Minnesota, which gives us more flexibility. We can carry forward unspent balances as a resource each year without needing to send money back to the state or elsewhere. Our leadership has supported this type of distributed management and accountability. Over time, we have built very strong financial skills in the units, and finally, we have the data systems that are necessary to support the model. But no model is perfect. If someone tries to tell you that life is greener on the other side, whatever that is, it simply is not so. In a traditional model, there are benefits and also things that have to be managed to make it work. And the same is true for RCM. You have to know that up front and be willing to choose for the benefits in spite of the disadvantages that need to be balanced and managed. Here we have listed what we believe are the primary advantages to our current model, some of which are unique and others that are true for any RCM model. First, we share information throughout the process with our unit leaders and financial managers. They know what we are estimating for changing variables, what the potential scenarios look like, what the priorities are, what is driving cost increases, et cetera. Second, units keep their generated revenues, so they want to raise more. And we are able to count and direct that revenue to meet institutional priorities. Third, we provide information to those accountable for their budgets so they can make the right decisions and take actions to benefit their unit and the overall university at the same time. Fourth, transparency means academic leaders can learn about what is driving overhead and infrastructure costs, which encourages them to help shape priorities in those areas and then to advocate for and understand those needs. Which fifth also then correlates to the process of support unit leaders making the effort to explain their needs and the work that they do to help justify any investments in operations or in administration. And finally, we've created a credible process that leaders trust even if they don't always love the decisions that are made. On the other side, there are disadvantages that we need to continuously address. In this model with revenue incentives, we have to guard against decisions made about academic programming based solely on the revenue goals of one unit, perhaps at the detriment of the university as a whole or another unit. There is no automatic creation of a central pool of investment funds. We have to purposefully create such a pool, which we did in this year's budget, for example. We have to constantly educate our leaders about various aspects of the model through turnover or just busy lives. Leaders need to be reminded about the connections between attributed revenues and cost pool increases and how it all works. There is no automatic investment in interdisciplinary or cross-unit activities. Again, if that is something we want to prioritize, we need to create mechanisms to reward that activity or create those expectations. And finally, not all investment can be in the academic units. There will always be cost increases in our support units for salaries or improvements there, which means increases in the cost pools, and we have to help the community understand that those costs are also an important part of the overall framework. In conclusion, as we manage those disadvantages and the changes in our environment, the budget model needs to be reviewed and modified to best fit our current needs. Over the years, we have implemented significant changes primarily through larger efforts involving consultation and representative committees to discuss issues and recommend changes. That effort was last done about 10 years ago. That led to changes in the technical mechanics of the model and reinforced the basic properties of the model. And last year, we started another such robust committee process to review the issues of today. To date, the current committee has made recommendations to again retain the RCM model as opposed to returning to a traditional model, and to make a few new technical changes in some of the mechanics. And they are continuing to review additional issues. The provost and the CFO will be taking the committee's recommendations under advisement in their overall consideration of our budget model going forward. It's an ever-evolving process of improvement. And that concludes our overview this afternoon, Chair Wheeler and committee, and we thank you for your attention, and we would be happy to answer any questions you might have.
Great, thank you so much for that overview and the context in which we have to make decisions and choices. Appreciate it very much. Are there any discussion or questions? Oh, President Cunningham. It said president there. I saw it, Regent president. Okay, but I got it now.
Thank you to both of you. And it's a complicated model in higher education, and it's worthy. Every time I see it, I also learn more. So I appreciate those kind of components. I do think, as you're pointing out, there's There's models that we had in the 80s and 90s, and there's a model that we have today. The model that we have today in an RCM model is a place that a lot of universities went in those interval years. And then since that time, it's a model that a lot of universities have tweaked fairly substantially in that time as well. So it's, as you mentioned, it's not a static model, and it's something that needs, constant evaluation. And, one of the things, for example, that this model, there's many good things about it, which is in this model, we have unit leaders who are entrepreneurial, who have their budget, they get all their revenues. We remind them that means they also have all their costs. They get all their revenues. And with that, they can be really creative in ways that they're managing their individual units, right? So that's a real upside. A downside of this model is that each unit is competing with the other units, and it is in the benefit of an individual unit to, let's say, start a new program. It doesn't matter to them necessarily. It's up to Central to figure out if that means taking students away from a different program and a different unit, and we're just competing amongst ourselves. So that's something that has to be addressed in this model. It also is well known across the country to be an absolute barrier to everything interdisciplinary. And it's a miracle that the University of Minnesota has achieved such great status in interdisciplinary work while not having that accounted for in the budget model, because again, the revenues go to the unit. The revenues are not, there's currently not a great mechanism within it. So those are all things just for us to think about and just to understand. Lots of pros, some cons, no perfect budget model. Whatever budget model you have needs to have tweaks and adjustments to it. This is a very common model across higher education. It's also, many universities across the country are also tweaking it, coming up with hybrid models, other modifications to it to address different times and functions. So those things are also all true. But then the other thing, just to remind people, and this came up a lot in the spring when we talked about doing 7% scope reductions, it's just a reminder that that's something at our level, in my budget team and in the administration's senior level, we say, okay, you have to do 7% scope reallocations. What we do not do, and what is entirely up to the deans and the chancellors, for example, is what that means for their unit. And so when people hear, as you will continue to hear this year, well, my school has these cuts and they're managing this by taking away these programs, that is because your leader decided that that was the best option and what they need to do to prioritize their budget within their school, knowing that those are hard choices. So you will hear about things that get cut and programs that get reallocated, and I will hear about them too, but we are not making those decisions in this model. Those decisions are given to a dean, and in some schools, a department chair, where they have their budget and then they decide that they have 7% less funds, and how are they going to reallocate them in the same way that everyone does when they have a paycheck that has been cut by a certain amount. So that's just something that's really important to understand about where the decision-making lies. Also, just to refresh with the tuition, they get revenue. And if tuition and revenue is down, then they also have less revenue, right? The university doesn't just make that up. And so with that, that means that there's decisions that units make as their enrollments move up or some program enrollments move down. Those things wind up getting flexed within their own budgets. So we can have a lot more conversations about this, and these folks are the experts about it, but just at the 5 million foot level, I want people, especially newer folks, to understand what we are managing and what we aren't managing, and a lot of great things about this kind of model, and then also what some of the limitations are.
Great. Thank you, President Cunningham. Other questions or comments? Yes, please.
On behalf of the Council of Graduate Students, I also want to touch on that notion of departmental and collegiate level siloing, because that has been identified as one of our advocacy priorities for that academic year. We had a medical history PhD student speak at our General Assembly who commented that being within the medical school, they at times felt cut out from some of the resources that might be provided by CLA. And I can speak to my own experience as someone who has taken classes in 4 different colleges. I think I can count CLA, Carlson, CFANS, and the Humphrey School, my home department. And I've similarly felt, that programs are unwilling to provide resources to doctoral students that are not their own. And so this is one thing to keep in mind as we use this budgetary model.
Great, thank you, Student Representative Ellis. Yeah, and we are known for interdisciplinary, programmatics. So that's a barrier, is a problem, and probably one of those evolutionary tweaks. Yes, Student Massey.
Thank you, Chair Wheeler. I just wanted to echo similar sentiments to Ethan because as an undergraduate student myself through the Carlson School, but also taking classes through like the law school and CLA as well, I found it difficult to find funding for undergraduate research. And I think this is sentiments that I'm seeing as well with many of my peers. So just wanted to echo that both in the graduate and undergraduate school.
Appreciate that. Your experience means so much, so thank you for sharing that. Other comments or questions? Yes, Regent Bergstrom.
Thank you, Chair Wheeler. And thank you, Director or Vice President, Assistant Director. I'm curious, President Cunningham, your comments, you answered part of my question with the, how this interdisciplinary piece being one of the disadvantages. To what do we attribute our success in that area and our high ranking in that? How have we managed to continue to do that despite those pressures?
So without getting into all the details of how that particular ranking, which that's probably a side note to get back to you. We do, have a very comprehensive university for which all of these students have described how they are able to take classes across different schools. So that's one thing. There have been some purposeful pilot programs that have allowed programs to be built across programs. So that's some of it. And then if I'm the most frank, I'll say we're digging in to why we're considered really good at that, to make sure that we can continue to be really good at it, and then to grow that more. The world's students and the world's problems don't exist within a particular school, right? So if we looked at the problem of sustainability that we talked about this morning, that the training and solutions to that exist by disciplinary expertise across. And so that's part of evolution of universities then. How are we going to manage to solve those problems in, let's say, research? And research is a similar issue here. The indirect fund flows, the overhead flows flow, to the schools individually, and there's a lot of disincentive often for that collaboration, although we're managing to overcome some of that. But you can do incentives, you can find fixes in the budget model for that, you can purposely incentivize components, you can change the models. But understanding where we've been successful in it is something that we're digging into more now. I do believe that what I've seen in the program is we are doing better at that than a lot of peers, but we have a lot of barriers here, and I think you just heard about some of them from the students, and that's, and I think the teaching side is even more difficult interdisciplinary than the research side is right now, because again, the schools, which are very much doing what we ask them to do, which is to generate good revenue and create excellent programming, but they're very much incentivized financially. Even though they have other good intents, but the financial incentives are definitely to see that within their own school. So,
thank you, Regent Hipt.
Thanks, Chair Wheeler, and thank you, presenters. I just want to say I really like the budget model. I know it's never fair. It can't be fair though. Families have to reallocate money, corporations have to reallocate money, and so do universities. And without the reallocation of money, we can't set our priorities because there's no money to do that. And it's tough. There's never enough money. I think 2024, we got 0% from the legislature. 2025, 2026, 0%. So 3 years of 0% in a row. And then you're given 3.5% raises from what we voted on earlier, which we need to do with workforce enhancements. I get that, all that, but we're locking into tuition increases, and we need to, say that out loud because it's difficult, you know, and there's never enough money. I don't care, whatever board, whatever family I've ever been in my life, I've never had enough money, and you know, it's really tough stuff. So, but our boards, one of our main responsibilities is to pass a budget, and it's not always easy, so. Appreciate that, and you make it look easy, and make it look like it's painless, but I know how much work it is, so thank you.
Thank you, Dibs. Executive Vice President Goldman.
Thank you, Chair Wheeler. One thing to note, and I remember during my interview talking to President Cunningham about this, and at the end of the day, all we have is budget to move this university forward. We have great research, great academics, great mission, great service, great faculty, great staff, but it's the budget that empowers us to move the needle. From where I sit, as we look at the next year, RCM, as President Cunningham noted, is a budget model that is at a lot of universities across the country. My desire, my direction, and my hope over the next year is we say, how do we take this model for an ambitious university along with an ambitious strategic plan that's going to catapult us forward in ways that we never have been before. So over time, this board, this community will see tweaks as President Cunningham described, as Julie described, the committee recommends. Because at the end of the day, a budget model doesn't create more money. A budget model empowers and enables us to make the hard choices, as Chair Hipsch had mentioned, on where we're going to invest, where we're going to go, and the choices. And that means that there's things we're not going to do, and that means there's things we're going to do even better. So over the next year, hopefully around this table with the work of Julie and Corinne will help us catapult and use this budget to move us on every dimension around the strategic plan in partnership with our deans, our schools, and our colleges.
Great. Thank you. Thank you. Any additional questions or comments? All right. Seeing none, we'll close that topic. Thank you very much for your work. Appreciate that. All right. Now next we're going to consider the consent report. I'm going to take a little chair's prerogative on this one, and we'll take the resolution related to the transfer of East Cliff and to the University of Minnesota Foundation as a separate item. So we can have further discussion on that one. Executive Vice President Goldman, will you summarize the rest of the items in today's consent report?
Thank you, Chair Wheeler and members of the committee. The two consent items to highlight now include the appointment of debt underwriters to the pre-approved list following a request for proposals and an employment agreement for the Dean of the Labowitz School of Business and Economics at the Duluth campus. President Cunningham recommends approval of these two items.
Thank you. Take up these items before turning to the resolution. Before I get a motion, are there any questions, comments, or requests to separate out any additional items to be voted on separately?
I just have a comment, Chair Wheeler, if I could, on, I've known the new dean of the Labowitz School for 15 years. He's an outstanding scholar. He's published over 100 articles, and he's also won awards for his undergraduate teaching, and he's an outstanding candidate and helped my little department create a degree and a master in tribal administration and governance, and made sure that we stayed in the kind of public policy tribal administration lane as opposed to the business administration lane, and did it in a very kind way. So I appreciate him, and I think he's going to make a great dean of a really good business school. So thank you.
That's fabulous. Thank you. All right. Is there a motion to approve on behalf of the board the remaining items in the consent report?
I'll move.
Is there a second?
Second.
All right. Any further discussion? All right, all in favor, say aye. Aye. Opposed? No, don't hear it. So the motion is approved. As been our practice, President Cunningham will now step away as we discuss the East Cliff item. Before we get into the discussion, we'll have the opportunity for discussion. Is there a motion to approve on behalf of the board the resolution related to East Cliff transfer to the University of Minnesota Foundation?
So moved.
Good movement.
Second.
And a second. Thank you very much. Let me offer my thoughts before turning to Executive Vice President Goldman on this topic and then opening it for discussion. As I consider this transfer, we see this as an extension of the task force, and some in the community have asked for clarity about that very thing. That task force recommendation we unanimously approved in July of 2024. The task force recommendation was to retain East Cliff as the unique role that it plays within the life of our university and to transition the funding for operations and capital expenses from public resources to philanthropic support. Today's action helps fulfill that recommendation. UMF, charged by the boards of regents with its founding and sole purpose of supporting this university, is in a perfect position to help steward this asset and raise funds needed to maintain its key university asset for the generations to come. And given the renovations currently underway, this is a really timely move for us as a Board of Regents as well. And it allows us to reconsider how we maintain moving this asset going forward. There will be ongoing operational costs, and as the docket notes, the proceeds from the sale will be used to help cover those costs. I'll add that the terms of the agreement also provide us with necessary protections to ensure that the future of East Cliff, if for some reason the foundation is unable to maintain it, it comes back to the university's hands. But I am fully confident that this will mark a new chapter and a positive one for East Cliff and our continued partnership with the foundation. With that, those comments, I'm going to turn it over to see if Executive Vice President Goldman has additional comments.
Great. Thank you, Chair Wheeler. Your comments were perfect to outline and frame why this transaction makes such good sense for the university, the foundation, and the public as well. To highlight the specifics, before the committee today, the resolution authorizes the sale of the house and improvements to the University of Minnesota Foundation, which is for $2.2 million, which is consistent with the 2022 appraised value for the property. The agreement includes a 40-year ground lease of the land to UMF and the simultaneous 40-year lease back of the house to the university with options for an additional 40 years on both. This legal structure guarantees that the property remains protected as the official residence of the president and a key university event space for the foundation and for the university for decades to come. I'd also like to highlight that the UMF Foundation will be responsible for the future capital expenditures on the property, and the proceeds from the $2.2 million sale will be deposited into a quasi-endowment to help fund the university's ongoing annual operating and maintenance expenses associated with this leaseback. Based on this, I recommend approval of this final step in the transfer. Thank you, Chair Wheeler.
Thank you so much, Executive Vice President Goldman. With that, is there any discussion on the resolution? I see, Regent Farnsworth, that you have your hand raised.
Thank you, Chair Wheeler. Appreciate it. Just to have a couple comments. One, this proposal was first brought to my attention on October 1st, and so since then I've been doing my best to carefully review the materials provided to the board, various communications from constituents, and want to thank everyone who engaged in conversation or reached out on this matter. I think broad engagement better supports our governance outcomes. That's always how I've led since being on this board, and so I want to thank folks for that. Just a couple other brief comments. There's a number of things about this agreement that bring me pause. Not only kind of the process of how we got here, and as folks know, I very much value our governance processes and engagement processes as a board. And so this moved pretty quickly to come in front of us as review and action. I think that leaves pretty limited time for public input, engagement as a board member voting on this, quite frankly. You know, I think that is relevant here. From a public stewardship and fiscal responsibility standpoint, I think us as the governing board of a public land-grant university have a responsibility to oversee and govern our institutional assets. I want to express sincere appreciation to the foundation for the work they do in all areas of the University of Minnesota to support the University of Minnesota. I've seen that up close and personal as a member of this board for the last years, and this has nothing to do with that. I see the task force report that I did vote in favor of in July 2024 a little bit differently. I do continue to support the goals and conclusions reached by that task force, but don't see this agreement or this proposed real estate transaction necessary in any way to help fulfill or honor those agreements, or I guess goals would be a better way of saying that, of the task force. So I guess see this differently than perhaps other colleagues do. I hear and appreciate the background information provided by the chair, provided by Executive Vice President Goldman, but I won't be able to support this today. The deal or this proposed transaction doesn't feel right to me. I'm unable to support it. And also, Chair Wheeler, as a matter of procedure, I would request a roll call on this item. Thank you.
Thank you, Regent Farnsworth. Any other comments or questions? Regent Gully.
I just want to echo what Regent Farnsworth said and say that I see this as part of our governance responsibility and as something that is one of the things that we oversee, and I am concerned that taking it out of the realm of the Board of Regents would make the whole process less transparent and less available to the public to see what we're doing, and that we wouldn't have the same governance over East Cliff if we turned it over to the foundation. So I'm going to vote no on this. Thank you.
Thank you. Regent Johnson, Ruth Johnson.
Yeah, thank you. Just a different perspective here. I've been on the Board of Regents here a little over 4 years. I've been on the University of Minnesota Foundation for almost 3 now. I know a little bit about how it works. I've been on the East Cliff Advisory Board recently. I think it's interesting to note the University of Minnesota Foundation owns the McNamara Alumni Building right here, the one that we're in right now, okay? And we rent our space from the University of Minnesota Foundation. I think this has been an excellent way of managing the finances, and our work is not affected here whatever by the fact that they own it. We're here to do our work. And we have options here. We just heard about our budget. We don't want to have to raise tuition or do anything else to raise more money as part of the Board of Regents for the university in order to do maintenance on this East Cliff. We want it there. It's important for our activities at the university. It's an important part of our history. It's an important part of welcoming people to this community and other fundraising, but we can have them do the financial heavy lifting of purchasing that. We can use it. I think it's a fantastic deal, and so I strongly support it.
Thank you very much, Regent Johnson. Regent Hips.
Yep, I concur with Regent Johnson. I'm just reading the mission of the foundation, and it's support greatness at the University of Minnesota, and that's what they're doing. They're constantly helping us, and I just really appreciate all that UMF does for the university and for our board, so I'm going to support the motion.
Thank you, Regent Hips. Any other comments or questions? Regent Fralin.
Thank you, Chair Wheeler. This is something that's been brought to the board in different ways in the 4 years that I've been here. And one of the things that is a core to what we do as Regents of the University of Minnesota is that we're fiduciaries of this university. That is, our fiduciary responsibility is a paramount responsibility. And according to the Association of Governing Boards, which is the association of all of the educational higher education boards, governing boards are stewards that are responsible for tangible assets such as buildings and endowments, but also for intangible assets such as their institution's reputation and mission. In this instance, and in this resolution before us, we're being asked to consider both our role as stewards for the tangible asset of East Cliff and the intangible asset in the university community's relationship with East Cliff. The Brooks family graciously donated this property and East Cliff nearly 7 decades ago to serve not only as the residence of the president, but also as a location for University of Minnesota functions, many of which are actually University of Minnesota Foundation functions held at the residence when the president's occupying it. And As a University of Minnesota asset, East Cliff has remained the responsibility of the University of Minnesota with certain funding from the Friends of East Cliff via UMF, but has been the responsibility of the University of Minnesota for capital investments and operations and maintenance. This resolution allows the University of Minnesota to do 5 things: retain title to the property on which the East Cliff residence sits, retain full use of the property as the presidential residence and special gathering place for University of Minnesota and UMF functions. It transfers all responsibility for any future capital expenditures for the asset to the foundation and away from the University of Minnesota's budget for the term of the lease. It establishes an account in the amount of $2.2 million to fund ongoing maintenance and operations associated with this asset. And then it gives us the opportunity to have this asset transferred back to the University of Minnesota at no cost upon termination of the ground lease, including all of the improvements that the foundation makes to the property and the building while they own it. So for those reasons, I am supporting this motion.
Thank you, Regent Verhalen. Any other comments? Executive Vice President Gold.
Thank you, Chair Wheeler. You know, my one observation, and I appreciate Regent Van Halen comments on the 5 points. Over the last 11 months since I've been at the university, the number of times I've talked about our decaying assets and our infrastructure across the university. I mean, a lot of it's being held together with bubble gum and baling wire. And honestly, when it comes down to the hard choices, part of the reason we're having to invest in East Cliff right now is those that were in the chair before me, before that person, and that person had to make the hard choice of where do we put the limited assets we have to invest in our infrastructure and our buildings, and rightfully so, leaders at that time chose to invest on the campuses, not necessarily into East Cliff. This transaction, with the support of the foundation, who, as Regent Hipsch outlined, is really in support solely of the university, gives us the ability to have a facility that we're proud of, that this president and presidents into the next generations and generations after that, this foundation board and future boards will be able to have events. So for me, where I sit, trying to come up with all the innovative ideas to keep our facilities as good as they can be, to have one less old building, honestly, that we have to maintain, to me, there's no other choice but truly to support this resolution.
Thank you so much, Executive Vice President Goldman. Any other comments or questions? Okay. With that, we should call the roll.
On the East Cliff resolution, Regent Bergstrom.
Aye.
Regent Bergstrom votes yes. Regent Farnsworth.
No.
Regent Farnsworth votes no. Regent Gully.
No.
Regent Gully votes no. Regent Hines.
Aye.
Regent Hines votes yes. Regent Hipsch.
Yes.
Regent Hipsch votes yes. Regent Ruth Johnson.
Yes.
Regent Ruth Johnson votes yes. Regent Tad Johnson.
Yes.
Regent Tad Johnson votes yes. Regent Lugar.
Yes.
Regent Lugar votes yes. Regent Mohammed.
Yes.
Regent Mohammed votes yes. Regent Turner is absent. Regent Verhalen.
Yes.
Regent Verhalen votes yes. Chair Wheeler.
Yes.
Chair Wheeler votes yes.
The resolution passes 9-2. Thank you very much. With that, and with there being no further discussion and the resolution having passed, I believe, we have the informational items too. I've missed a page. Thank you all for your patience. All right. That brings us to informational items. So I'll turn back to Executive Vice President Goldman to see if there's anything to highlight there.
Great. Chair Wheeler, members of the committee. Our informational items include 5 required annual reports on the university's financial health and physical assets. I encourage you to review those reports in your docket. One of the items to highlight is the rating agency update, which confirms the university's excellent financial strength, with both Moody's and Standard & Poor's affirming our high credit rating and assigning a stable outlook despite the headwinds facing higher education. This reflects the exceptional financial strength, reputation, and leadership of the University of Minnesota. And in the reports, rating agencies recognize the serious, proactive approach the university is taking to ensure our long-term financial health. This is a phenomenal result, and I want to thank Mike Volna, VP Julie Tonneson, VP and CIO Andrew Parks, and all of their teams for the work on the core elements that played into the rating agency's decision in these times of such headwinds. The stable outlook forward is something that we should be proud of, and unfortunately, many institutions across the country have not had the same results. So with that, I conclude my report, and thank you, Chair Wheeler.
Thank you, and thank you for bringing that report forward. To have a stable bond rating obviously is very important to this organization because it allows us, more borrowing capacity so we can support the students and the very strategic planks that we talked about earlier this morning. So critically important and an important report worth reading for those of you who have not. With that, and I think there being finally, I think I'm on the last page here. Yeah. No additional business before the committee. We stand adjourned. Thank you, everybody. In the morning.